Stage is yours.
Thanks, Amit. Hi, everyone. My name is Carl Brundage. I am a CTA as well as an MVP. Currently, I'm a master architect at Oseva. That's my day job. I have a few Salesforce certifications and also co-lead the Allentown, PA developers group. So coming together to talk about Salesforce topics, that's kind of part of my DNA, who I am, to help folks understand and learn from each other. If you want to connect with me, you can definitely follow me on LinkedIn. Send me a connection request. Let me know, where we talked, because I get lots and lots of requests, or follow me on Twitter. And today, our topic's a little bit different. This is probably the first time in a while that I've given a presentation that doesn't have some sort of demonstration or artifact or something to build for it. And it's come out of the lots of questions that I get around being a CTA or a technical architect, and really trying to understand, what does that mean? What is that role? What do you do each day? And then more importantly, how are you successful? What are the skills that we need to do? So if we think about it, the CTA definitely stands out as one of the pinnacle Salesforce certifications. And it has that word technical in it, right? So based on name alone, it's all about technology. Well, that's where the trick might come in for Halloween. Not exactly. The role and success in it depends on so much more. And we're going to spend some time talking about what it looks like to be successful in this role. We're going to examine the meta. Just like in Salesforce, you have metadata. Let's look about all those things that surround being a technical architect that aren't really technology. So we're going to look at the process, the people, and the leadership needed to make the tech successful. So we're going to start by understanding technical architect. We'll talk about meta, the bigger picture, for a while, look at people, process, technology, and then how you journey, how you go through the various stages to be successful. But I'm going to start with a little interactivity. So if everybody goes to the chat, find your chat panel, we're going to play trick or treat for Halloween. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give you a series of words. And if it's something that you like and you're interested in, put treat into the chat. If it's something you're like, well, I'll do it, but it's not my favorite, you can put trick. So we just get a sense of where people are for these different things. So the first one, coding and configuration. Is that a treat for you, or is it a trick? So treat, treat times 100. Okay, so we got a lot of people who like to develop things. Awesome. So on the other side, presenting and speaking. So maybe the opposite of coding. Is that a treat or a trick? Okay, so there's some treats, treat-ish. It's like your least favorite kind of candy. Okay, so we got a lot of treats there too. That's good. I like it. All right, doing things like code reviews, helping others to be better with what they're doing inside of Salesforce. All right, so we're seeing lots of treats. Oh, somebody got candy in there. That's pretty cool. Oh, a few tricks. Okay. Then let's think maybe broader. Instead of just in the code, how about project planning overall? Like thinking about the big project and how do you deliver success, whether that's agile or whether it's waterfall, however you're doing it. Okay, trick, treat, trickish. All right. So some things folks may wanna leave behind. All right, working with technology, just in a broad sense. Probably most people think that that's great here. So lots of treats. All right. What about the flip side? Working with people. Trick, few tricks, some treats. All right. Two more. Who likes going really deep in one subject? I'm the best Apex controller developer out there, or I build Lightning components like nobody else. So some tricks, few treats, a little bit split. Okay. And then the last one, what about being broad across domains? You know what? I know Marketing Cloud, I know Commerce Cloud, I know a little bit about everything. So some treats, a few tricks in there. Well, guess what? All of this is necessary to be a successful architect. You have aspects of working with code, but you also spend a lot of time presenting. You have to help others along the way, but you have to think about the overall project. Yes, Salesforce, the technology is its core, but we don't succeed without bringing the people into it. And you're going to have your areas of expertise where you can go really deep, but as an architect, you do also have to go broad across domains. So you kind of think about all these different areas that come into play. And when we think about that, everybody's journey is unique. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time and share my experiences because they're going to be different. Every architect you talk to, every person that you talk to has a different way that they've gotten to where they are. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with when I came into the Salesforce ecosystem and work forward, and then I'll go back to the older stuff. I started with Salesforce in 2014. So it's only been a little over 6 years that I've been working with Salesforce. And if anybody's studying for CTA, you know right away, hey, wait, it says like you need 7 years of experience. From an experience perspective, experiences can vary, right? You may have 7 years of experience, but you deployed Sales Cloud 12 times. Well, you know a lot about Sales Cloud, but you may not know service, all these other things. You may have 2 years of experience where you were at a smaller company and you were responsible and accountable for everything. You kind of had to figure out how to make these things work. So in many ways, the years of experience isn't as important as what your experiences are. I came in, I worked for a partner. I knew somebody that worked there and they said, hey, we have an SI partner, so a systems integrator that wants to build an app. Maybe you can help in there. And I came in with a very high performing, highly certified team. Most of the people had 5 or 6 certifications, and it really made me want to be good at Salesforce. I wanted to be able to have credibility with them. So it started me on the learning path and the certification. From there, I went to another partner, built an Einstein Analytics app, went to a third partner, built some Einstein Analytics apps, as well as a Force.com app. And then now at Odaseva, where we have a platform that does data success, so backup and restore, privacy, all those type of aspects. But I spend a lot of time working with partners, prospects, and customers, so the people side of things. If I flip back before I started in Salesforce, I spent 10 years doing CRM for pharmaceutical companies. So I worked at a software company that was delivering software and services. We transitioned from, really old pocket PCs, Microsoft Mobile, to building and releasing a SaaS application. I worked with probably about 100 different companies in biotech and life sciences, spent a lot of time managing a team, helping project manage projects, building SaaS solutions, deploying things. And then even before that, when I first came out of college, I spent time doing business intelligence data warehousing for the insurance industry. So I was very focused on building a solution there. So my whole career, it's been focused around enterprise software. Like that part of it has been a consistent, and working with data has been a consistent. So you see all the kind of different pieces that come in for my background. And there's some blanks because my journey's not done yet. I'm going to learn more things. Interactions I have with groups like yours, other people, there's always something new to learn. So that lifelong learning, looking and is really important to being a good architect. So a technical architect, if I had to give you a kind of description, a one-liner of what this is, well, this person, they plan, design, and review the construction of enterprise software. And in our world, primarily cloud-focused and Salesforce related. It could be in other places, but in the Salesforce world, that's how I see the role. And that person, well, they're responsible for a few things. They're going to create the architectural implementation design plan. So at the front, at the start of the project, what's the roadmap? Where do we want to get to? So that's a big part of the planning. If you think about in the natural world, an architect that's building the building, they're not necessarily the one that's out there pouring the concrete, but they're building the schematics, they're building the plan, they're making something that is aesthetically pleasing. Same idea. From an architect perspective, it's really important that we can identify strengths, weaknesses, and trade-offs in design decisions. One of the things that may be difficult to make the transition from a coding mindset to an architect mindset is there's not necessarily a clear right or wrong. If you've had any time working with mathematics, the answer is right or wrong. It's very clear, right? It's 5 + 2 is 7. There's not other answers. Well, when you're architecting, there's usually not a perfect solution. There's things that have a lot of pluses, but there's also drawbacks. Hey, yes, we can have everybody share ownership of this account because you need everybody to access it. But once you go over 10,000, you're going to have an ownership skew, which means these other things. So it's your job as an architect to really identify where is the design going to fall apart, and make sure people are making informed decisions on how to pick a choice. Communication, we're going to come back to that a lot today. You need to communicate these design overviews to different types of audiences. And it's not always a technical audience. It's often an executive audience or business audience. You're convincing them that the picture you've made for them, that's going to lead them to their goals. So there's a lot of influencing and being able to talk to people in ways that's comfortable for them. A lot of communication, we focus too much on what we want to say and not what the other side wants to hear. So that's really important from an architect perspective. We're also going to really guarantee the design supports the business requirements. You see a lot of times architects, they really want to be convinced if it's a new ISV app or a new technology or a new piece of information, because there's part of your reputation that's on the line. You basically have said, yes, this is what I think is the right solution. And that's part of the role. And then last of all, and maybe not to say it's the least important, but it's not a solo sport. You're not working by yourself, heads down, typing out something. You're collaborating with others in order to make sure that the approach meets the strategy and you can deliver that functionality in a timely manner. You can't put a blind eye to how long something is going to take or whether it's achievable or not. There's always a time frame in which you need to deliver. So what do we focus on? Well, from a Salesforce TA, technical architect perspective, or the CTA, we focus on this technical pyramid, right? We talk about the application side, the system side, what are all the different certifications, and then the technical architect. And I think over the years, Salesforce and the community, we've done a pretty good job of demystifying what's involved here. When I first started, there wasn't a lot of information. CTA was this mysterious thing. You took a multiple choice test and then you failed this scary review board multiple times and then eventually passed. Like there was nothing that filled in the gap. So the information that's out there, it's done a great job of filling in those gaps. And you really know what the steps are, what you need to do, what a review board looks like, how to prepare with CTA 601, how to do an assessment with 602. My video of the actual review board I gave and earned my CTA, that's available in the community. So that's been demystified. But what we need to do next is we need to move into the meta. What else is there besides just the tech that makes it a successful CTA? We know from Salesforce that metadata, well, that describes other data. And we use that to make the configurations, the code, the automations, everything that customizes and drives the look and feel of your Salesforce org. And really, metadata equals flexibility. So if we think about that from a broader sense, as an architect, we have to have that flexibility. And I'm going to borrow a concept from the design world. Nothing to do with Salesforce. It's thinking about meta design. And it's a framework that's thinking about how you create social, economic, and technical infrastructures for collaborative design. Well, what the heck does that mean? The best way to say it is it's thinking about living systems, right? Let's just take a simple example. We breathe out oxygen, or excuse me, we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide, and then the trees breathe in carbon dioxide and release oxygen. So you have this natural living system that works together in lots of ways. And we can damage that. We burn down too many trees. Well, it creates lots of problems for us. But if you think about it, they kind of live together in a very natural way. And you're trying to do that. You're trying to, in a design perspective, improve the way we feed, clothe, shelter, communicate, and live, knowing that there's things that you're not going to know. And by bringing everything together, you can build for the future and have solutions for problems that you don't anticipate at design time. So what does it mean? Well, it means there's some tools that they use. They think a lot about abstraction, the ability to understand structure and its limits. And I think about that a lot from a technology perspective, right? We build models, we build sequence diagrams, we use object-oriented programming. We use all these levels of abstraction to make things simpler. Even in the requirements gathering perspective, right? User stories and putting things into sprints and epics, it's all about levels of abstraction. So that kind of resonated with me. It's big on building diagrams and topology. And if you know me, I'm huge proponent of building out system landscapes, object models, using pictures to convey design thoughts. There's an element of procedural design, so using processes and procedures. And that's definitely an area that is always, I think, weak in many companies or in many processes, many ways that you deliver solutions is you haven't thought through what's the process look like to be successful, not only the process today, but how's it going to grow? And then emergence, so kind of the lack of absolute control. And a lot of times this is where you have the people aspect of it. So if we take these concepts and we think about our technology pyramid, well, our technology pyramid then becomes one piece in a larger pyramid. Technology can be the base, it can be the foundation, but you have to think about the process side of things. How are you going to organize for success? The people that are in the core, because without people, the technology isn't going to go anywhere. And then as an architect, having the right leadership thoughts. Well, you're a different type of leader. You may not be an authoritative leader, but you have to influence people to go along with where you want it to be. So let's take a look at each of these categories besides technology in a little more depth. And I'm going to start with people because I think it's the most important thing. And what I want to do is I want to start with a story from my past. And the situation there was we had CRM software for pharmaceuticals for sales reps. So sales reps would go out and talk to doctors, talk about their particular product. They might leave samples behind. They'll get a signature on a mobile device, get information back to the company, but very, very mobile workforce. And part of my role, yes, I was working on the data, but we were a small company. So I did training. I would actually go out to sales reps national meetings and we would have training sessions where we'd talk about, well, this is how you use the product. These are the scenarios that come up. And there was a training down in Dallas. We had a group that had some travel problems because it was Dallas in the summer and storms happen and people can't always get in. So I had this small class that basically came a day late. So we were on a accelerated, not standard training process. So like, let's get the people the basic things they need so that they can get up and running. And we worked through very collaboratively. We did things kind of ad hoc. And at the end of the training, we had a feedback session and say, well, what did you like? And one of the sales reps asked me, like, well, how long did you carry a bag? And what that meant was, how long did you carry the sales rep bags? Like, how long were you a sales rep before you came into this role? And I said, oh, I've never been the sales rep. And they were surprised by that. They were like, wow, you were able to convey to us this material like you were actually a sales rep in there. And that stuck with me of how I was delivering a message and communicating in a way that they cared about, the way that resonated with them, not just the things that I wanted to say. So that's kind of a success of mine that has stuck with me through the years about how being an effective communicator can really change the way that you work. The other thing that comes into play is really understanding a lot of questions, the why, the what, the when, the where, the how, the who, all those things from a writing perspective that comes up. And oftentimes it's not always accepting requirements at face value. And I don't mean you challenge every requirement, but sometimes requirements have already presupposed a solution. It's not, I need a way to collect information about doctors. It's, I need to enter on a call screen that has this field in the top left corner, the doctor's name. And sometimes there's perspective that you bring as an architect that they may not have thought of. And if you can have that conversation and challenge those requirements respectfully, you can come up with a better, more optimal solution or bring in things that they haven't thought of before. So it's really important to do that, and to do that in a way that's often called active listening, where you're not just talking all the time, you are listening and then you're asking back those questions. You're building an understanding. Did I understand you right that you said X, Y, and Z? The other thing that I do a lot when I'm listening is I listen for keywords. If you tell me always, if you tell me never, I like those as an architect because those are easy things to implement. Oh, we always approve this automatically if it's under 50,000. Great, we can think about how an approval process would work. When you hear the word sometimes or maybe, that's when an architect alarm bell should go off. You're like, oh no, here's complexity, because you start layering in the exceptions. Well, usually we approve if it's under 50,000, unless that's an account that hasn't paid because they are late on their bills, in which case we need to go to a manager for approval. And you're like, okay, now I see the complexity coming in and I might have to do something different from an architect perspective. So those type of active listening and keywords will clue you into where do you need to dig deeper and where do you need to let things take it at face value. The other element that I want to talk about here is building trust. And how can you build trust very fast? Because when people trust you, communication flows so much faster and so much easier. It's you can kind of cut through the positioning and the posturing and get to, all right, what really needs to be done. And one of the ways that I often build trust is I throw what's known as credibility darts. And this is a statement or something that I suppose that they're facing. I'm kind of testing out like, oh, you know what? I suppose when you're doing realignments, once a year, you're moving people from territory to territory, you have some challenges in knowing whether it's accurate before you roll it out. And you often have to have times where you have to fix things after the fact. And you can judge by the reaction because they're like, oh yeah, you know what, that is a big challenge for us. I wish that there was a way we could do something different. And then you can have a conversation about that. But they see that you understand that role and you're trying to communicate in a way that supports what they want to achieve instead of what you want to say. Along the same lines, you can build trust by speaking the language. And a lot of times I've worked in different industries. I've worked in insurance. I've worked in healthcare. Those are my two main ones. But then I did some time with manufacturing. I did some time with financial services, and oftentimes it's getting over the vocabulary that's used. There's certain acronyms and certain things that mean different things. And if you can get over that hurdle, then it's much easier to speak the language of what that customer is. I've worked with recruiting firms, for example, so companies that are going out and looking to hire in people or to do placements, and they have a very different set of lingo around. It's not necessarily accounts and contacts; it's their clients, and then it's candidates and that sort of thing. And by using those type of terms, it goes a lot further. I have another customer that we've done different type of archiving projects, and we have a cold archive or a warm archive. Well, they use the term purge for the cold and then archive for the warm. So do I have a little bit more burden on me to think about, okay, internally, I may talk about things in cold and warm all the time, but the customer wants to use purge and archive? Yes, but it's much more natural for that customer to use those terms. So I try very hard to talk about that way when I'm speaking the language of the customer. The other thing that comes into play in this area is setting expectations. And this is so important because you end up in situations where maybe you've had a meeting for a half hour and you're like, we haven't gotten anywhere. We didn't set expectation of what we want to accomplish. We didn't set next steps at the end. Knowing what you're going to do and doing it is very important. And it can be little things that others aren't doing. Every time I send a meeting, put an agenda on it. We expect to talk about these things, and here's what you should come prepared for. Takes a little bit of time and thought on your process, but then it means people can come a little bit more prepared to the meeting. They're not going to do 10 hours of work, but an idea of what's coming, or maybe they need to delegate to somebody else because that person is more expert in that particular area. It's little things like sending meeting notes after a meeting or a recap or the action items. So often these little steps get dropped and then you have a project that's not moving forward or you have misset expectations. So spending that a little extra time to make sure you're doing the little things is really important. And then one of my favorite things, which becomes really important if you're going for a review board, is using precise and concise language as an architect. If we're talking something very technical like security or OAuth flows, what's the difference between authorization and authentication? Like knowing those terms, using the right term, and then saying what needs to be said and stopping. We probably have all encountered folks that just talk on and on and on. And what do? You end up tuning out. So you don't want to be the one that others is tuning out. You want to make sure that your message is being delivered and received. Along the same lines, it can happen in presentations. I know people who are concerned with letting you know everything. Like, I got to build slides and I got to put content out there and have every piece of content possible, because if I don't, you know, you're gonna miss something important. Well, I hate to tell you, but if you do that, they're gonna miss everything, because the receiving end, they're not gonna pay attention. Good communication, it's not a matter of what you say, it's what somebody takes away. So say less and make it count. All right, process. I'm going to share a kind of a process story with you from my experience. I had a customer that was going to embark on an archiving project. So they were going to take information from Salesforce and remove it, still make some of it visible. And this wasn't a customer I worked with. You know, I was on another project, but then there was someone that wasn't going to be able to work on the next phase. So I kind of had to come in cold. I didn't know a lot about the process. I didn't know a lot about the customer. I hadn't built a project plan for it. And there was some concern from the customer side, because we hadn't really set a clear path from today to success for them. Like, they were having trouble envisioning, like, how do we get to a successful outcome? And I spent a lot of time thinking through what that project plan and what the set of steps would be. Now, I didn't know how to do the archiving. It wasn't something I had done before, but as an architect, you start seeing commonalities over time. So I knew we had to define what was needed. So I had a definition phase. I knew we had to set up the systems and where we wanted to test. So we had a setup phase. I know we had to build. So I put down, okay, we're going to spend some time building, and then we're going to spend some time testing. We're going to do deployments, and we're going to train or do a knowledge transfer, right? So even without knowing the specifics that what needed to be done there, based off of your prior experience, you can activate that knowledge and say, these are the things that we need to do. This is how we're going to plan out. And now we might not have every single step from today to success, but you have a much better idea of what it's going to take to be successful in your archiving project. And the customer went from kind of being upset, almost on the verge of being a red account, to, okay, I understand the plan. Let's work towards doing this plan. So that's where you can bring in what you know to give that level of comfort with the customer. Now, you can't do this by yourself. You're going to have to make sure you're engaging with the customer and the right sponsors. And you probably have heard the term that project management is about herding cats, right? Like, keeping everybody together that's doing different things. When it comes to an architect and the level that I'm working at, I have a different term for it, because I call it managing pumas, because I'm dealing with executives or leaders. They're really big cats, right? They're not your normal cat. They're coming and they're running a whole marketing team or a whole sales team. So you have to treat them a little bit different. So you have to manage them. You're not going to hurt them, but you have to manage them, because you need their support. You need their buy-in. You need to understand what motivates them and how they're going to be successful. So that understanding that people aspect makes you build a project that has the right sponsorship on it. And along those lines, knowing who your sponsors are, you're going to define the goals and success. You're going to say, well, what needs to happen for us to be successful? I like to do an exercise at the start of a project that I haven't seen done a lot. If we're doing a kickoff, I will spend some time asking people, at the end of this project, what does success look like to you? How do we know that we've accomplished what we wanted to do? And it often makes people stop and think for a minute. And sometimes I think we get caught up in making this grand transformation. They're like, if 80% of my sales reps can enter their calls on time, we've had a successful outcome. So you can use those to build in the KPIs and how you want to measure your project to come back and say it's been successful. So take some time, think about using that exercise in your projects. The good one of change management, right? So again, this builds in the people side of things, because we don't always like change. We're very comfortable doing things a certain way. So we have to think about our processes of how are we going to move somebody from what they're doing today and make them successful. And it often is making sure somebody feels like they have a voice, and making sure that there's sponsorship or participation in the project team. There's pilots. There's evangelism, that they know what's coming and what it's going to mean for them, and they feel ready and a chance to answer questions. All those aspects of it, because what doesn't happen, you're not on a project by yourself, right? If you architect the most beautiful, perfect Salesforce solution in the world, but you don't manage change management, nobody uses it, and the project fails, they don't go and say, well, that project was a complete disaster, but boy, Carl is a great architect. You're part of that project. You can't separate yourself from the success or failure of it overall. And that's something it took me time to learn. Definitely in my younger days, I was much more strong-headed, meaning, I don't know that I always played as nice as I should have with other departments or other teams. I was focused on the data aspect of it. And if our engagement team wasn't doing what they were supposed to, it was like, well, our engagement team is stupid. Instead of spending the time to think about, well, how can I help the engagement go easier? Can I give them data metrics? Can I tell them what's coming? Can I help them anticipate? Because it's a team sport. You're not going to succeed or fail by yourself, and nobody's going to look and say, oh, just that person was successful if the whole project failed. So as an architect, you kind of have this broader viewpoint now of all the different areas. Contingency planning. So making sure you know what to do if something's going to go wrong. And it can be simple things like, do we have a rollback, or maybe more importantly, a roll forward strategy if releases or changes don't work well? What if people are out, or somebody can't participate? How can you go to the sponsorship? Just not thinking about only the happy path. Sometimes I joke at work that I'm the grumpy old man, because as an architect, I almost have a little bit negative of a mindset, that I'm always looking like, what could go wrong? Or, okay, here's a slide that we're talking about how great something is, but what's in it for the customer? Like, just looking at always for those improvements. And I hope it doesn't come across negative. I try to think about that, of how instead of saying yes, but I can say yes, and so I can be additive to what's coming from folks. But I think it's really important to think about those things, because if you only plan for the good stuff, the bad things will definitely blindside and knock you. And then before we kind of wrap up process, you need to think about crisis management. And crises, they can be different levels. I'm not always thinking of, end of the world crisis like we're in now with COVID, where, things have radically changed. But something you deployed doesn't work. You overwrote data. You had something go wrong. And oftentimes, the biggest mistake I see in this area is people stop communicating. If you think about it, if you're on the receiving side of something going wrong, there's a lack of information, and you just want to know. And you want updates. You want to know regularly, are you working on it? Is it understood? Is it received? And as technical people, myself included, I've had to break myself of this habit. We have a tendency of not wanting to communicate until we know everything. Like, I want to give you the answer. I want to solve the problem for you. So I don't say anything. And minutes go by, hours go by, a day goes by, and all you're doing is creating a lot of fear and uncertainty on the other person's side. So the simple step of, if something goes wrong, of saying, hey, customer, I'm gonna commit to communicating a daily update to you for until this is concluded. And sometimes the daily update is nothing more than, I've looked at these three things. I think I'm getting closer, or we're looking at this. We'll come back with an action plan. It doesn't even have to be, I have an answer for you, but that setting an expectation of communication and then doing it, especially in a crisis, that makes all the difference in the world of letting it blow up into something bigger, or mitigating that risk and getting back to normal. So as an architect, you spend a lot of time doing that. And I would be remiss if I don't talk about kind of all the tools and methodology that goes into play, whether it's the high level methodology, are we agile, or are we waterfall? Sometimes I think we get a little too wrapped up in saying, I am this methodology and that's what we use for everything. The work itself sometimes will dictate that a better solution or a better way of working will give you the outcome that you want. Like, oh, we have a fixed deadline, a fixed budget, but we're going to do agile. Well, that's not going to work. You know, if you don't know what you're building and you're just going to kind of piece it along, you're not going to come to a successful outcome. Or, hey, we have this, this other company halfway around the world that's going to build this part, and we're going to build this part, and we're going to do it in parallel, and it's going to all come together. No, it's not. You need to take some time up front and design the specifications and do contract first interface and do a waterfall-like project in order to be successful. So sometimes pushing back where you see those things that may not succeed from a tooling or methodology perspective. All right, let's talk about leadership for a moment, because this is where you bring it all together as an architect. And one of the things I can talk about is accountability. And a few roles ago, I was working with customers from an SI perspective, helping them build out what they want on top of Salesforce. And the customer, we were pretty early in the process. It wasn't the start, but we talked about kind of some high level ideas. And they said, hey, we want you to come down to Texas and spend some time with us to kind of explore some of these topics in a little bit deeper detail. And what I thought I was going down for is a day with their architects. So 4 or 5 architects, no big deal. We'll talk about some of the different concerns they have. I walk into an enormous conference room and they literally have brought 24 other people. So they have a room full of 25 folks with their, 24 plus their leader and me. And I proceed to sit there for the next 8 hours and basically get bombarded with, well, what are we doing about single sign-on? What's our sandbox strategy? How do we test? What are we, how should we integrate this into source control? What about this other system we need to integrate? Oh, well, we have security concerns, and oh, we need to do marketing cloud, and how do we migrate the data? And it was one of those situations that if I hadn't gone on the CTA track, I would have been totally overwhelmed. But everything that I prepared for and doing a review board, it led me to be successful. But I also had the mindset of, hey, I'm accountable for this. I either know what I know and I'll give you an answer, or if there's some things I will say I don't know, but I'll find out. And you can do that. You can do that, a few times. You can't do that for every question, or you lose your credibility. But it's definitely part of it is you're not the architect because you know everything, but you will take on the onus of finding out and giving somebody back that accurate answer. It's also important when we think about this situation and when you're leading with people, is that you have a lot of power as an architect, and you need to make sure you're using it in a respectful way. Everyone has a voice in this project, and you need to be aware if those voices are not being heard, and you can draw them out. Simple things like, hey, we haven't heard from this person. What do you think about this particular topic? You have to judge the room, because sometimes people don't want to speak up. Sometimes it may be you talk to them afterwards, or they want to put it in writing. So you understand communication ways, but be aware of that and make sure that you act respectfully. It's okay to challenge customers. When I say that, again, it's respectful, meaning look at maybe things they hadn't thought about. That's what they're engaging with you as an architect for, is for your knowledge. The way that you also help put together accountability and respect is by having a vision. You're painting the picture of, where does this project need to go? What does success look like? And then more importantly, how are we going to get you there? Because they'll buy into your idea of, this is where we are, these are the things we need to do, and this is the outcome that you are going to receive. And that's building on all the other things we talked about, but that vision is really important for bringing people along from a customer or a client perspective, or even within your own organization. And then part of leadership, I think, is also the idea of trailblazing, which is, to me, leaving a path. You're marking a path for somebody else. So it's building out guides, building out processes. So the idea that we've been here before, how do we make it easier next time? I've spent a lot of time writing guides in my current role, where we encounter something new. First time we see it, try to make it work. Second time, okay, this is making more sense. Now let's build for the future. So the third, fourth, 100th time we see it, it's much easier to do. So that's part of the architect. That's part of why I'm here today, right? Is helping to give back my knowledge to build the next generation of architects, to let people come up and move into roles that they find interesting. As an architect, I also have a mindset of driving to completion. Setting up those goals. What's the next step? What do we need to do? How do we keep this moving forward? And sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's tough questions about what comes next, but avoiding that meeting where you just meet and then don't do anything, right? Like, oh, okay, we're gonna have another meeting. We're gonna have another meeting. Like, you have to drive to something. I've had projects that I've come into where we just kind of talk about things and then do some things and come back. I'm like, this project is never going to end. We don't have a plan to complete it. So you need to make sure you drive to that. Continual learning. There is always something new to learn. And it's not always just new tech to learn. I've spent some time recently through being an analytics champion. There's been different trainings offered through Salesforce where they did one on public speaking, but mine was more messaging to audiences in large format. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you build a concise message? I did one this week on emotional intelligence tools, like ways that you can help improve your emotional intelligence. So it's learning in areas that maybe you like, that are natural, like tech, but also learning in the other areas that you may not be as strong in, or things that you haven't been exposed to. So making sure that comes in. And I also think of it from a teaching perspective. There's probably going to be questions today that make me think about things that I haven't, or think about in a new way. So I'm going to learn from you. So don't feel hesitant to always ask questions or engage with people that maybe you think, oh, wow, I would never talk to that person. What would they get from it? Well, you have to learn a lot from those type of questions because it makes you think of things in a different way. And then second to last, our favorite topic, conflict, right? You can't avoid conflict. I'm a big believer in confronting reality. And what that means is you can't ignore or turn a blind eye to what it means. Let's say you have a company and you're making $50 million a year, and you say, what, we want to double our sales for next year. We want to go to $100 million. Okay, that sounds great. Let's do it. Well, no, there's an element of you have to raise the conflict of, well, what does that mean? All right, you have a sales team of 50, you're gonna have to double that sales team. You're gonna have to double your marketing efforts. Like, let's make sure we understand what it means. So we understand the trade-offs, right? There's that architect coming through, the trade-offs, and make the right design decision. So being not conflict adverse, but doing conflict in a healthy manner. And to put this all together as leader, you have to have resiliency. You have to have the ability to bounce back from things. You have to not let one particular item bring you down too much. I saw something in the emotional intelligence training that really it stuck with me this week, where it talked about when you're less experienced, you put on a lot of armor. You go into situations almost in defensive, like, okay, I want to protect myself as much as possible. Like, I need to win, you need to lose, I need to build myself up, and those sort of things. And I definitely did that when I was younger and less experienced. But now, when you're more experienced, they basically showed the person naked, going in without anything, because you have all these other internal tools. You have internal confidence. It's okay. You can ask me those questions. I'm not going to be offended. I don't feel like you're out to get me. I know that I can draw on these things to help move forward. And it definitely comes with experience, that aspect of resiliency, but you can look at it in different ways of how you bounce back and how you use that. So if we think about all these things and we put them together, what do we end up with? Well, we have that foundation where you're technically sound. You make sure that you're very aware of the people. You build in the processes to harness those people and move them towards where you want to do with authentic leadership. And when you put that together as an architect, you're not designing just the technical, you're designing for success. And that's what, to me, is the meta architect, is you're taking all these things together and you're designing a successful outcome, not just the next widget inside of Salesforce. So for me in that role, technical expertise alone, it's definitely not sufficient. That's not why I'm a good architect, because I know everything about Salesforce and I have all these certifications. It's just a way for me to kind of evaluate my technical knowledge. It's all these other things. It's building trust through the methods that we talked about and thinking about the meta. How am I designing for a successful outcome across all these different areas? And I didn't get there in one step. I got there in a journey. And if you think about it, the first time you're trying to do something, it's just about making it work. Like I don't even know what I'm doing. Let's figure out just how to make it work. Great. Second time, all right, how can we make this better? You know what? There's some things I didn't do the first time as well as I would have liked, so let's make it better. If you start seeing it the third time, you're like, okay, we got to make this repeatable. We're going to do this over and over again. And at the end, you can make it optimal. And I'm gonna bring in a personal story from my family. I coach hockey for 4 kids, which I was not a hockey player or an ice skater. They drug me into it. But my oldest is 12, and he's on a middle school team, so 6th grade. And we are in a school team. So what does that mean? It means we have players from all different abilities. So I have some players who are first year or second year skaters, and then players like my son that have been playing hockey for 5, 6 years. And if I look at what happens on the ice, the first year players, they're kind of figuring out like, how do I stop? Where the skating aspect of it is hard. How do I get up ice? How do I get turn around? All those type of things. How do I pivot and skate backwards? The players that have been there a couple years, they're working on kind of positioning. Like, okay, I got the skating down, but where do I need to be? How can I be in a better position to make this play? They may be skating with their heads down. They're not paying as much attention. They're still internally focused. The repeatable ones are starting to look for their teammates. They're like, okay, where are people on the ice? I want to pass to that person because they're going to be open. And then my son did something that I wasn't expecting him to do. We were in the third period, so there's 3 periods in hockey, and there's a face-off in the center of the ice. This is where the 2 players line up and the ref drops the puck. And I watched my son, and he moved up and in. He plays defense, so he's usually in the back. And I'm like, why is he doing that? And what happened? The ref dropped the puck. The other team won the face-off, and it went right to where my son was because he moved in to take it and pass it back to the other team. And I asked him, like, after the game, like, why did you do that? He's like, well, I've been watching the whole game, and that when that player is on the ice, we keep losing the face-off. And the way we lose the face-off is he sends it between our center's leg to that spot. So he made that optimal adjustment to be in the right place to play. So am I bragging about my son a little bit? Yes, but I'm also using it to illustrate the difference between starting out and when you have the experience that you can anticipate those things and make it optimal. So that's the idea. As you progress on the journey as an architect, you're thinking about the optimal because you've seen these things so many times. All right, we're just about, just changed to 10:50, so we're perfect on time. I'm happy to take any questions that you have now.
Guys, if you have any question, feel free to put into the chat window and we will love to answer that. And let me jump into the first question which somebody posted into the initially. So he was asking, is there is a difference between Salesforce technical architect and the solution architect?
Yes. So if we think about all the different topics today, that technical architect, they're really looking across everything, right? They're looking across Salesforce, but they're looking across integrations, project planning, testing, QA, DevOps, that whole spectrum. So it's a much broader viewpoint than a solution architect, which is inside of Salesforce, how do we build something that solves the requirement that we got? So it's not to diminish a solution architect because it's really important to have a working solution in Salesforce, but it doesn't necessarily have all those other components to it in order to deliver success. I think sometimes if Salesforce had a redo, they probably would take the word technical out of it and it would be a Salesforce enterprise architect, because that's what I see it to be an equivalent outside the Salesforce world. Is it's really that enterprise architect role.
So
And then I
what
think
was
that ties in, there's another question about CTAs who have never done coding in life, right? So that's the kind of the misnomer of the technical part of technical architect. You're not going to get into code structures. You're not going to get into, well, can you build the right factory service pattern in order to deliver this code? That is a skill in of itself. And there's really great code architects out there, whatever you want to call them. They may call them technical architects just to make it confusing, but that's not the skill set that you're looking for a technical architect. Can I code? Yeah, I can code. I can go in and write Apex. I'm probably better now at writing standalone code, meaning it's a trigger that does a particular piece of functionality. It's some invocable Apex that you can use to post to a ledger from Process Builder, like those sort of standalone things. Architecting a whole end-to-end system, think about like an ISV app. That's not my skill set. Have I done it 20 years ago? Yeah, I did it in .NET. I did it in ASP.NET. That's sort of technology VB, but it's been a long time since I've done it. So my skill set is definitely not as sharp there. So that's where you can be a CTA without necessarily coding. My personal perspective is I like to know things one level deeper than I need to talk about. So if you think about CTA, like if I'm going to talk about what the code should be, I would have liked to have done a little bit so that it's not just book learning, it's experience learning, but it's definitely not required to be a CTA.
So one more question, Carl, like somebody pinged me in the separate team. So he's saying like he's working on as a technical lead
Mm-hmm.
and want to become a technical architect. What mindset he need to think about it?
The biggest thing I would ask you first is, okay, on your projects, do you worry about just the tech piece that you're doing? And if you hear, hey, you know what, the customer is not happy about the project plan or the timeline, or QA is having trouble, do you breathe a sigh of relief and you're like, oh, good, I don't have to deal with those problems? Or you're like, I wonder how we can help. If you think about and kind of turn to how can we help, then I would say that's a much better mindset to grow into this role. If you're kind of like, well, I'm glad those aren't my problems, you really need to evaluate it. There's nothing wrong with the role that you're in, but you're gonna have a lot of different challenges as a TA than you are as a tech lead. I spend a lot of time building presentations or building guides. I don't necessarily spend a lot of time coding or looking at code in my role. So think about that of where it transitions and where it takes you, because sometimes people will get into it and be like, oh, that's not what I expected and that's not what I want to do.
One more interesting question, management
Mhm.
sometimes turn out to very tricky to handle. Want to hear more on that?
So conflict management can definitely it can definitely go downhill very, very fast. It's really thinking more about what the other side wants from my perspective than what you want. And if you put yourself in their situation, uh, then you often can come to a better outcome. If I think about, all right, a customer is upset. Well, why are they upset? Is it, they had made promises internally. Maybe they have a bonus tied to this going out on time. Maybe, they made promises to their management. Maybe they're on a performance improvement plan. Like there's a lot of things that you don't know in when conflict arises, and trying to get to the root of it by being open in your communication, being open and frequent with what your perspective is, what you're trying to do, what the steps are. Like that a lot of times will lessen the conflict. If you want to kind of get philosophical, right? There's kind of different ways to have conflict be resolved. You can have the win-win, the win-lose, the lose-lose. Like so, the traditional theory is, well, I win, you lose. Like that's a very kind of core conflict. The other is, well, we both kind of lose because we create such a negative outcome that nobody can succeed. Or then the win-win, which is more what I try to go to, right? Of, well, how can we get you over whatever this challenge is so that you can be successful, we can be successful? Because it's not fun. I mean, it's stressful. You feel the personal stress when you're in a conflict situation, right? Your heart rate rises, you're more edgy, you yell at the
Yep.
kids because it has nothing to do with it, but you bring that conflict or that stress with you to other places. So I don't have like the perfect solution for conflict. I
Yep.
know it doesn't get better by avoiding it. I have found that being proactively communicative in it has usually will help diffuse some of the conflict.
Yeah,
But
the same.
you'll find your own way. You'll find your own voice by going through
Yeah, so same thing somebody mentioned, like it's really hard because it's escalated very quickly when handling incorrectly.
it.
We have to know.
Yes.
Yeah,
To me, think about why somebody is escalating. Sometimes it is, okay, you said the wrong thing, but more often than not, it's, I didn't hear anything, or I didn't hear anything timely, or I expected this, or they create an expectation and you don't live up to their expectation. But they didn't tell you the expectation. That's not fair. Well, that's where you need to set the expectation. I'm gonna send you an email every day. I'm gonna send you an email every hour. I'm gonna, whatever it is, you set that expectation, what you think is reasonable, and then deliver on it. And you'll find that I think the escalations will fall. Think about the messaging. Make one of the things I've done in the past is there's leadership style surveys that you can do. I had a course when I was doing my MBA on it. And what was interesting is there's your normal way of communicating, and then there's your high stress conflict type way of communicating. And for me, when I get into those situations, I get more direct in my communication. And I think that's what helps. Like I cut away from the other stuff and I try and focus just on the core that what needs to get resolved, and be as effective and brief as I can when I'm communicating back and forth. Um, you can also think of the medium, because sometimes emails can get confusing or miss.
question like any advice and tips who are going to prepare for review board?
So there's a lot of stuff out there. The biggest mistake I see people do is, okay, I passed my designers, I'm ready for the review board. I'm sorry, but you're not. You're not even close. If you haven't done scenarios and practiced and done mocks where you've given yourself the time pressure and the no resources and then practiced your delivery, you're not going to be successful. So that aspect of training yourself, training for the review board of how do I practice? What do I say? Do I have my timing down? What's my methodology? Eliminating all the things that if you just kind of go in and do it, you'd figure out for the first time. You need to have figured that out. If I go back here, right? Let me go back a slide. Oops, wrong way. If you were like, I did my designers and then I did my review board, you're kind of here. You're like, oh, I'm gonna try and figure out how to make it work. Well, you got to do your practice mocks, and you got to figure out how to make it work. And then you have to figure out how to make it better. And then you got to figure out, well, how can I make my practice go fast and I can get on my time for every scenario? And then you end up here. Like you want to hit an optimal. I've done it. I had plenty of time. I said what I said. I feel like I covered every requirement, all those things. And that's when you go in. So practicing all those things, that's what you want to do to be ready for the review board. And resources, I mean, go to the community.